We will ask the public if anyone here from the public wishes to speak about anything not on the agenda. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 3. And Ken, before you give that report, I think you've got an announcement you'd like to make of our...
I did, but I've sent, I wanted to introduce Jill Moross, our management assistant, but I sent her off to City Hall to rustle up Andrew Crabtree. So, we'll do that. We'll do that later. When
Okay.
I'm trying to get you to a quorum. That's the easiest name I can see.
Okay, why don't we start with number 3 then? Why don't we start, we'll make it official with a roll call.
Okay. Chair Wasserman.
Here.
Board members Pravetti. Here. Courtney.
Here.
Tucker.
Here.
Crabtree. Schmidt.
Here.
Kennedy. Kalman.
Here. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can try and reach Director Kennedy over.
Okay, was he one of the 7 that had RSVP'd?
He's one of the 8.
One of the 8? Morgan Hill resident?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Just saying, just throwing it out there. Ryan, you okay if we start with the budget workshop presentation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A few opening comments, and as I put these together, I realized that in the back of my mind is the fact that I will be departing as of June 30th, and assuming we have an executive officer, and I'm quite comfortable and confident that we will. So I'm going to be leaving after the end of June, and some of the comments probably get into messages that I think are important for me personally in terms of this organization and this process. This is a budget workshop, so it's an opportunity for you to ask questions, solicit information, get clarifications, ask for things to come back with the budget, etc. We had originally tried to schedule this as adoption of the budget, and that was based on the governing board having a meeting in July, but not in June. So we had to have it that way. When the governing board shifted its regular meeting from July to June, back at your January meeting, that opened up a, from my standpoint, much more reasonable process, so long as we get quorum in June, a more reasonable process of having this workshop, taking the budget, having the budget become public in April, taking it to the Public Advisory Committee meeting in May 1st. It's one of their priorities to look at. And then bringing it back to the Implementation Board on May 15th, and then the Governing Board in June. And I think that is a more understandable process, both for the public and just how this all will unfold. Several overall comments. Not quite a year ago, when we put together the 2012-13 and 2013-14 budget, and you remember we had 9 weeks of 2012 or 13, since the agency was formed on April 26th of 2013. So we had a little bit of 1 year and a full year after that. We were really operating with an awful lot of rough estimates. We had the cost model. We were not quite stabs in a dark room, but it was not the best lit room either for making estimates for all sorts of things. But we knew that as starting up the agency, we would go through that. This year's process, while the numbers are draft in this report, I think they are close to what they will be in the April budget document, and we have a significantly better base of information for making those types of estimates. Having said that, I can sort of guarantee you that 3 or 4 years from now, you'll have even better base for doing a budget, because we're still learning, especially in terms of revenue projections.
And welcome, Mr. Crabtree. And now we have 7.
And now quorum. Very
now
good.
we're quorum.
Thank you. Andrew, I just was asked to just start the budget overview, the budget workshop.
And he's almost done. Just kidding.
So a couple of comments. One is about the numbers are better than a year ago, but we're still not as refined as it will be in the future. And I think the budget reflects 3 overall objectives that I think, and this gets sort of personal, will continue well beyond 2014-15. One of those is to provide very good service to both private and public sector applicants for both land and wetland permitting issues. And I think that needs to be reinforced again and again and again that this agency is about providing good service for applicants. Second is that we want to get ahead and stay ahead of the physical construction requirements, both for impacts to land and to waters, and that's reflected in the budget. And the third is to really think through conservation strategy approaches, data needs, what can be done, and resources expended in a very productive manner, and not trying to play catch-up. And I'm trying to learn from some of my colleagues in other jurisdictions who've had to go through the catch-up game. So another observation of mine is I think it's important for the agency to find ways for the public to be involved. We are truly blessed with many organizations, individuals, academic and other resources that can and I think should be part of the agency's work. We have great resources out there. There's no need for the agency to go by itself. We need, I think, there's a lot to be gained by pulling people into our process. And the last observation is that it's important to keep the wildlife agencies involved. It took 8 years to complete the plan, which I say with great sort of gulps of, my gosh, how long it took, and yet that is faster than almost every other plan took to get done. 8 years. And we only went that fast because I think we were able to establish and maintain a really good cooperative working relationship between the local agencies and the wildlife agencies. So we could have notable disputes and arguments and resolve it and or whatever, and 10 minutes later take the lunch break and talk about vacations, and in the afternoon go on to different subjects, and there wasn't a carryover of the anger or the disagreement or the dispute. And when organizations generally are meeting because they have things to fight about, unfortunately that becomes the dominant, oftentimes the dominant perspective of the interaction. And I'm saying that for the habitat plan as it was developed and it's implemented, I think the wildlife agencies are a partner in all of this. They're a partner in the plan, they're a partner in the implementation. So we'll have a lot of disagreements in the future, but having them regularly communicated with, I think, is a very, very high priority. There are 9 conservation strategy issues identified in the staff report. Those really come out of the current year budget. Budget objectives, they reflect the areas of high importance to implementation of the plan, and high importance to various segments of the community. So these continue to be the areas where there needs to, I think, be considerable early on attention. And lastly, what I suggest for moving through the staff report is that we do move through it. So we start to see if there are any questions on background, process, objectives, strategies, take the revenues, take the expenditures, and just sort of move down the line. And if there are no comments, that's fine. But if there are questions or requests for information or whatever, we will try to respond. And if to the extent we need to bring things back in May, we will do that.
Good. If you'll hold up there, anyone from the public wishing to speak? We're on item, what are we on, Brian? 3?
3.
Item number 3. Anyone wishing to speak? Seeing none, so I'll turn to our committee members. And any questions thus far of Ken regarding this item? Nope. Please proceed. Brian?
No?
I have some general questions, but I don't know if you want to.
You want to do it now?
Yeah, I'm done. So
go ahead.
Okay. So I just want to start by saying that I saw 2 things in here that you weren't quite ready to say in the past, so I'm very happy to see that. One is about the inclusion of at least one wetland restoration or creation project in this budget, and enrollment of existing County of Santa Clara or Open Space Authority sites into the reserve system. Before I asked if we could get into this upcoming fiscal year, and Ken wasn't sure that that was possible. Now I like to see that confidence, and you'll give something for the next executive director to carry out.
Just be careful. Short timers make a lot of promises.
Exactly. Well, we can max out those promises.
All right.
But along that lines, when I look at page 3 or page 21, depending on which one you're using, page 3 of the staff report, let's say, the fees I'm looking at as kind of a proxy for impacts that are going to happen in this fiscal year. And I'll look to staff if I'm wrong about that. But when we're talking about stay ahead, this is if those are impacts, those are the impacts we have to stay ahead of.
Exactly. We are the agency, the local partners, the land use partners with land use authority are moving through finishing up the pipeline projects, the projects that were started before the plan, they don't count toward the plan, they get wrapped up. And that process, that availability for action without the plan ends in October. So as we move into this next year, the pipeline will end. And everything after that will need to be addressed in the plan. So you're right. The fees reflect consumption of land. And related impacts.
So while I'm glad to see the wetland creation and enrolling existing county and OSA sites into the reserve, does that add up to staying ahead of $11 million worth of impacts that we're seeing out there?
Yes.
It does.
If the plan anticipates over about 12,000 acres of county parks and recreation land, about 1,000 acres of open space authority land. That doesn't all need to come in one gulp. I don't think it would be feasible to do it. But the objective is to move some of those sites, and Mr. Courtney and I have talked about this and how we do this, and we'll be doing more of that type of front-end planning in the very near future. But picking those sites up, what are the easiest ones? How do we move those through, get those through the county board for conservation easements and dedication? And the same thing with the open space authority. So that process needs to start unfolding in this coming year. The other thing you mentioned are the wetlands. And it is, from my standpoint, absolutely imperative that to use the regional general permit that I'm confident we are going to get from the Corps of Engineers, we need to have a wetland project under construction in the summer of next year. And that is a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that can be met.
Committee Member Kennedy here. Now we have a quorum plus one. Good deal. Mr. Schmidt, any more questions?
Yeah.
Please continue.
Let's see, page 4 at the bottom, item 3.2. And I don't know if I should be looking at all these smaller items, but I'll do it anyway. Existing open space, $30,000. What is this? Is this management of stuff that's going to get transferred to us?
This will be the, and it is appropriate to get into this level of detail. That's why it's there. The existing open space is this process of moving sites through and into the reserve system. So there will be biological work, there will be processing time. We assume that the agency will work in close cooperation with County Parks and Recreation, with Open Space Authority, so that we move through this. But this will take time. It will take, there will be biological assessments that need to be done, there will be conservation easements that need to be drafted, details to be worked out. For any particular site, there will be a set of details and data needs. The wildlife agencies will need to be comfortable with the data, with the biological data. So all of that is part of the work program to get those sites through the process.
So it's those sites that are coming from say, the county to the open
Yes.
space, to the reserve. Okay, great. And then the last thing was on burrowing owls. I think the overall objective said burrowing owl conservation. So I was trying to figure out if that meant we're going to be taking action. And when I look at page 5, it looks like survey and coordination and studies, but not on the ground action. Is that
I think these are the couple of points here. One is that there is a requirement for annual surveys, and we have already linked up with other organizations that have been conducting surveys. The survey requirement goes beyond the habitat plan primary area, goes all the way up to Palo Alto, around Newark, Fremont. We've had meetings with Don Edwards, National Reserve, people working from Mountain View, other places, to try to coordinate their data collection with our requirements, so we don't have to go out and try to redo what they're doing in any event. So, but the survey is a big, major part of the OWL strategy. Because the OWL strategy says we need to grow the population, we need to increase the population, which means we have to track the population pretty carefully. So that's part of it. And then working with these agencies, the coordination is another major part of the strategy. I would anticipate, and given the amount of, potentially the amount of OWL money that may come in this year, $5 million, which actually, when I wrote this, I didn't anticipate that number. But I would anticipate that the strategy will need to look at how do we acquire land. And there's a lot of flexibility, acquisition, easements, leases, or whatever. But we're going to have to start figuring out how to acquire land. And if we have money available, then there will be more of a push toward how do we acquire owl, land beneficial to the owls.
Okay. And this last comment might be a little bit tangential, but whenever we get that wetland or enroll our first open space, I think that should be an event. So we should do something, have with a cake or something. Since I missed the big event we had last year. Thank you.
I met with people yesterday talking about donating wetlands.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's out there. That's mitigation and all towards other stuff, so. Okay,
Mr. Chair?
committee members, Member Tucker.
Yes, I was looking at the budget, and I am wondering what is item 1.8, other administration and support expenses? Everything else seems pretty detailed, but what's $117,000?
Well, it's the, we go back to the staff report, the numbers total up pretty close to that, I think. One of the things I want to do in the budget that comes forward, the official budget, is to move the space contract, the rental contract with Morgan Hill, and then some of the other office equipment and supplies into a separate cost center. I think that just makes more sense as a large, specific expenditure. And then you have this whole collection of miscellaneous things, from insurance to training to memberships and all sorts of.
So that brings me to my next question, which is, if these are one-time set up, when you're planning the next budget for the following year, you're anticipating some of these are going to be dropping off?
I wouldn't anticipate that. Most of these the cost model set out $20,000 for insurance. This current year is about $4,400. As the agency acquires a role with specific properties, the insurance agents have already told us those numbers are really going to go up. So, you know, right now we have almost nothing to insure, which means we can get away with a low insurance premium. But those numbers certainly will go up. Training, I think, will be, I think it certainly should be, a part of probably every budget this agency has off into the future, because staff turnover, consultants, new people come on board, and the training is really, really critical. Same thing in terms of outreach, memberships. These are generally items that will need some level of attention during most years in the future.
Okay. And one last question. I think I started on this about 3 or 4 years ago. I don't remember, this seems like a large number to me from what I remember, $3 million annual operating expenses. So what, can you refresh my memory, what was our prediction? And how far off are we?
Well, if we take $667 million and divide it by 50, we come up with about $12 million a year.
Oh, really?
So we are still well below that. Now, of course, that includes land acquisition. So the good news is right now that the revenues are well above the projected budget, which means we should be able to start building up the resources to engage in land acquisition, whether it be part of a grant, whether it be helping the county, Open Space Authority, which is, I think, the two major sources of actual acquisitions. So we'll start building that pot up. So you may have an acquisition that takes $3, $5, $7 million suddenly. But the other thing that I think is reflected here is that the approach for this agency has been a minimalist approach in terms of staffing and in terms of resources. And over time, as the agency grows, as it gains more responsibility, those numbers will probably creep up over time. But the effort at the beginning has been to really try to keep this down. The other thing in terms of the $3 million is that there's $1.35 million, essentially $1,345,000, that are the reimbursements of plan preparation costs and the endowment fees. And that's a percentage of revenue. That's just locked in. The endowment goes into a lockbox at the county. That's all for the future. The plan preparation fee account, as it builds up, will be distributed back to the original partners that prepared the plan. That's part of the plan preparation idea. You will get a slice of that money as it goes into
Okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Right now, there's nothing in that pot.
Thank you, Member Tucker. And before I recognize Member Courtney, Rob, after your comments, what I'm going to do is ask everyone here if you have any comments. You know, page 21 is income and revenue and expenditures. We'll go there. We'll go to the next page. We'll go to the next page. Because I know each of us has different things marked. We want to ask questions. So, Rob, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on Member Tucker's comments and suggest, Ken, that perhaps for each of the major, numbered sections, that a subtotal would be useful, because I think if you look at number 1, right, that's sort of the administrative overhead for the agency. The other 2 and 3 are programmatic related, and then 4 is really, planning for the future. And then if you can show, the remaining sort of fund balance that you expect that's going to be for future land investment and other expenses, I think it would communicate more clearly, sort of programmatically, where we're going with the budget.
Thank you. Member Pravetti, will you?
Thank you. I had a similar comment. Well, first, I just want to acknowledge Ken's opening statements with respect to the objectives for the budget. We definitely appreciate all your personal and professional contributions to getting the agency to where it is. But I agree with other members that we need to be more explicit about land acquisition and land management. So there's a lot of vocabulary here that those of us who are familiar with the plan and conservation strategy and reserve system, but I think for the benefit of the public, when are we going to start acquiring land? When are we going to start managing land? Is that the Habitat Agency? Is it the other partners? So I would just urge that we be explicit about that. Thank you.
Members, Kennedy and Callahan, any comments you want to add? We can move on.
Page 21.
Okay, very good. That was touche. I like you. All right, 21 done. Moving on to 22.
I do want to.
Please.
So Ken, the wetlands creation and restoration budget for 220 includes everything other than construction?
There's 110,000 in the current budget that is assumed to be carried forward.
Okay.
And yes, and certainly for 330,000, we can do more. We have more money than would be needed, we think, for one site. In my heart of hearts, I would love to have said 2 sites here, and in fact, in an earlier draft I did, and people cautioned me not to be that optimistic. But we certainly have the resources to get one site through a process, 2 construction drawings, by, let's say June, July of 2015. And if there's an opportunity to do a second project, and even if the money were a little short, I'm sure that there will be interest in amending the budget to add a little money to get 2 projects through. But we certainly have money to get one project to the point of start of construction. But not the construction costs. Those will have to come. Those will be an additional amount once we actually know what the project is.
Right, and the only reason I bring it up is because just based on my experience at EPA, I'm overseeing some wetland projects which are very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what size this project is or where it's located and so forth, but I actually thought that was low. That's all.
Check your microphone, please.
Sorry. That was, oh, do I need to repeat that?
No.
Okay, that was all.
Yeah, no, I think, but I think it also reflects the approach of this agency to try to do things on the low side of the cost curve. And very honestly, personally, I prefer to start there. So I told some people that in managing this project for too many years, my approach tended to be to set a very tight deadline and grudgingly give ground. And in this type of thing too, I think, okay, maybe it's going to, if it costs a little bit more, I'd sooner look at that as an issue rather than putting a bigger number in and then suddenly having the work start to work toward the cost number. I know that can happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And to Commissioner Callahan's point, anyone wishing to speak on pages 22, 23, 24, 25? Any further comments? We've had a lot of good comments. We really have, and I appreciate all of you reading the reports and coming prepared. All right, thank you. And question I had, and it tied into the And it says under 1.1, cost estimate for the executive director. And I think I'll bring up my specific questions when we hear from CPS later in the agenda on executive director.
I would say, Chair Wasserman, that is, I would say, an educated plug number. You have to have something there, and it's an educated number. It's not just a dart thrown at
Oh,
you.
no, I
But the point
appreciate
is
that.
that
I'm
it
just
will
concerned
become
of half the
specific
county
later on.
staff leaving
Yeah.
and applying to be executive director. That's all. Okay, so without any further questions, item 4 is to review and discuss, and I think we've done that. And Vera, we don't even need a motion beyond, yes,
I just wanted to provide a comment on the restoration.
please.
So the reason why, oh, right, what?
Item number 3.
Three.
You have to introduce yourself.
Oh, restorations 3?
Yeah. My name is Tara Donovan. I'm with ICF International, and I work with Ken on Habitat Agency implementation issues. And the reasons why that budget does not include construction costs, because we would not go into construction until about August for our projects, because we want to construct them closer to the rainy season, and not have them dry out across the summer. So, just some background.
No, I knew it didn't include construction
Okay.
costs. It was actually the engineering and the permitting and the planning and all that stuff that goes into developing a site before you even get to construction is expensive. That's all.
I'm liking the idea of a rainy season. That's the next. That concludes item number 3. Ken, did you wish to make your announcement now?
Yes.
Introductory announcement?
Thank you. Jill Moross, under contract of the City of Morgan Hill, joined us in, come up, Jill, or at least stand up. Jill joined us in early January, right after the holidays. She's a half-time management assistant. She has been has established herself as a very, very valuable part of the office, taking on all sorts of interesting challenges and taking things off of my desk, thankfully. Anyway, Jill has been absolutely great. You will be seeing her name probably in various emails and different things. And in the budget document that we just talked about, there is a recommendation that Jill's time go to 3/4 time. And I think that will be a real plus for the agency. I just wanted you to identify a name, connect a face to the name, and indicate how pleased I am with the services we've been receiving from Jill.
Thank you. Jill, do you wish to make any comments?
No, I've been enjoying myself and learning a lot.
Okay. Favorite sports team?
We're minors.
Okay, good. Just making a note. 3/4, you said, Ken?
Yes, okay. They're going to 3/4.
Got it. All right. Thank you very much. Vera, it was your recommendation regarding number 2 that even the implementation board should not approve the minutes at this time? Is there?
Only for the reason, Chairman, that we don't have the entire governing board here. You're both at the same meeting. And if the governing board had any kind of a correction that we don't catch here, then they would have to take it up next time and then come back to the implementation board to, again, approve revised minutes. So why don't we just do them all at one time?
Agreed.
Okay. Oh, that governing board. All right.
Oh, my gosh.
Now we'll move on to item number 4, the adoption of a policy for dedication of privately owned real property in lieu of the payment of certain mitigation fees. And I'm going to guess, Ken, you're going to make this presentation.
A brief set of comments to introduce the item. Having a process for providing land in lieu of fees is a habitat plan requirement. And the details are found in 3 different plan chapters, and part of the challenge has been to weave all of this together into a coherent whole as a policy document. So the policy is a provision of land in lieu of fees for private sector applicants. There also will be provisions for public sector, and then also provisions coming in the future for wetlands, provision of wetlands in lieu of wetland fees. We started out trying to address all of it and realized we had something too complicated to try to boil down to a reasonable number of pages. So what you have are for private sector applicants. We don't have any applicants right now. The Second observation is that any specific land in lieu of fee agreements requires implementation board approval and approval by the wildlife agency. So you're going to, whatever happens here, if anything does happen, you will see it. And just a couple of observations I wanted to highlight. There's been a lingering concern, I think, in general discussion that somebody's going to sort of dump the unwanted back 40 acres onto the Habitat Agency. And there's a provision in the plan, which is reflected in the policy, and it's in the staff report, that the land needs to be qualifying land, which means it needs to be moderate or high conservation priority or have some other type of major value to the conservation strategy. So there's a filter there that may take a lot of things, may prevent a lot of things from even getting here. And the second is that the fees offset the fees that can be offset are about 65% of the land cover fees. There's 35% that can't be, including the endowment and land management, plan prep. These are things we need cash for. And then the required implementation board findings for approval are right out of the Habitat plan. So that at least was a cut and paste. So with that, management team has spent more time than I think they wish they had spent on putting this policy together. But I think it finally has distilled down to what we really need to do to use the plan.
Thank you for that. And before I ask committee members for questions, I have a couple too. Anyone from the public wish to speak on item number 4? Seeing none. Member Prevetti, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. I recognize that the wildlife agencies have a role in this. Do they have a role in reviewing this policy? Did they get a chance to take a look at what our operational procedures will be on this?
No, and they've really not indicated any great desire to be at this level of detail right now. Part of the job with the wildlife agencies is to triage the items so their limited time can focus on things that they think are the highest priority, and I don't think this never got to that level.
Okay. And then my second question is on page 6 of the proposed policy, paragraph number 5 on page 37 of the packet. It talks through the procedure, and as per your comments, it sounds like this was the cut and paste from the document. I'm just a little bit concerned that the wildlife agencies can not accept the agreement, but there's no acknowledgement that they have to do so with cause or with some kind of documentation. So I'm just...
I would say as the plan reads, if they don't like it, it's dead.
Okay.
They have to sign off on it, and I think the thinking being, obviously, it gets back to the findings and consistency with the plan and all of that, but I'm not sure the plan ever links the wildlife agency decision to actually making any type of findings.
Okay.
But that's the way it would be presented in terms of, does this meet the conservation strategy? Is the land medium or high priority for conservation?
Okay, and I know it's an ongoing dialogue that we have with the agencies, but I would just say that if we are in a place where the executive officer believes that it does meet the facts and the findings, but the wildlife agencies have a different opinion, I would imagine we would want to have some kind of, they would have to put something in the record so that way the parties would know what they need to work on, as
Yes.
opposed to it just being a blank check.
Well, yeah, no, I would anticipate, if it came on my shift here, that certainly one of the first things that I would do would be to contact the wildlife agency, say, we have this proposal and we need your initial reactions to it, et cetera. So if they start raising concerns, we can work with the proposal, work with the applicant, work with the agency to see if it can be sorted out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to do what I normally don't do as chair, and I'm going to jump in because I want to piggyback on what Member Prevetti just brought up. Ken, on the first page of this report, page 27, in the middle, it says approval of any land in lieu of fees agreement requires approval by the state and federal wildlife agencies and the implementation board. I've been working with you on this for the last 3.5 years. Land in lieu is a very, very important part of this agreement to expedite the process, consolidate agencies, and since I've been here 3.5, it doesn't go back to your 8 years, every step of the way, I understood there was agreement with, what are they, Fish and Wildlife or Fish and Game now? Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife, as we went through, the members from Fish and Wildlife were at those meetings at the Water District for the first couple of years. There were times when we were in agreement. There were times when we were in disagreement. They had to get back to us. And when this, how many pages is this document, Ken?
The plan?
Yeah, the plan.
The plan is about 2,035.
Okay, there's 2,000 pages that have been put together over the last 8 years. Fish and Wildlife has been there all the way along, and the one thing in this item that I asterisked, exclamation mark, put a question mark next to, was that sentence. I got to tell you, it's news to me that an individual who comes into the municipality's planning department says, here's my property, you look up on a map, you pay the fee per acre, mitigate, or I want to dedicate all this area here, land in lieu, it's got wetlands, et cetera. I want to cluster my development over here, whatever it might be. It was one-stop shopping for everybody but the Army Corps. And it was my understanding the person could come into that office, let's say here at Morgan Hill, say, here's my location, what do I owe? You're $5,000 an acre, and da-da-da-da. You fill out the permit, you mitigate per the plan. This is the first time I've heard in over a year that the agency, let's say here in the Morgan Hill Department, would have to send in a request to state and federal wildlife asking their permission for approval for this to happen. My understanding after we constructed this 2,000-page document was that we all agreed a person could come in, one-stop shopping, write one check, and get a permit that was good for the three, and we're still working on Army Corps.
Yeah.
So I don't understand.
I don't think this changes that at all. This is only the case where someone wants to say, I don't want to pay the fee, I want to provide land. And that...
Right, which was land in lieu, which has been a concept since I've been here for 3.5 years.
Right.
What is new to me, and I think kind of touches at least onto your question about, A, them having the right at this point to have a say after the HCP representative that receives all the papers and the documents and checks cross the T's and dots the I's tells the applicant, well, we think you qualify, but I need to send this to a federal and state agency for their approval. And to your point, they might come back and say no. They certainly have to have grounds, findings, to say no. And I don't understand why they've got to say so at this point.
Chair Wasserman, to answer the question, it is actually a requirement of the implementing agreement that is signed with the wildlife agencies. Section 9.5, well, 9.4.3 or whatever goes through how the agency can consider land in lieu. That's reflected in this policy. Section 9.5, there's a second bullet that says that the criteria also for land in lieu of payment of the fees, it has to be approved for inclusion in the reserve system by both the implementing entity and the wildlife agencies in accordance with agreement section 9.1. So when you flip to section 9.1, I'm just saying this for the record, it's the criteria for reserve system land. So the wildlife agencies have to use the same criteria that the implementing entity, the agency, does. It's basically lands contribute to the conservation strategy. The land has no hazardous materials or property encumbrances that conflict with the conservation strategy of the plan. They have to be consistent with the plan, reserve design and assembly principles. They have to meet the relevant criteria in the plan. It goes on, but it's all plan-related goals. So the reason that the wildlife agencies have an approval process in this is that they have to approve any land that's put in the reserve system. So the land in lieu, since it's being put in the reserve system, has that same requirement.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I'm certainly willing to surrender the mic in just a minute here, but I'll just give an example. People say I'm in favor of immigration reform. What reform is what probably every person in this room would have a different opinion of what reform is. I'm in favor of tax law modification. What modification? I look on here on the bottom of page 27 where it shows A1 and A2, land provided in lieu of fees must meet the definition. And for instance, B, it says it must be consistent with the plan's conservation strategy. tomato, tomato. What's consistent for me may not be consistent for Fish and Wildlife. I've got a real concern with this. My impression, my understanding, and I did not apparently read 9.9, 9.43 and 9.5 and 9.1 as well as I should have within the 2,000 pages. But my understanding was when a person came to the HCP, said, what do I owe, what can I do, that decision was made at the local level. And Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife, after being a partner with this for years, said they signed on. They said, okay, we agree. You can have local control to do this. And I mean, we have a document. You read what it is. It is what it is, but I'm disappointed.
Beyond that, obviously the fees are the easy way to deal with this at the local level. On the other hand, putting land into a reserve system is a different ballgame. It really, you have to determine that it's qualifying land. And the criteria for qualifying land, the staff report may say that it's consistent with the plan's called conservation strategies, but if you look at the policy, it really does include all of the requirements in the plan, not just that more vague language that's put in there to capture anything that we may have missed, in the other language. But really it has to be in an area designated as high or moderate priority for acquisition. And the local land use agency probably can't do that. That needs to occur with a biological assessment by the Habitat Agency.
Okay.
So, so it's not that simple because we really do need to make certain that it's qualifying land. The agency does.
This plan, one of the benefits of this plan was supposed to, besides preservation of open space, protecting endangered species, was also supposed to expedite the approval process. And if the executive director or whomever for the Habitat Conservation Plan says, yes, your land meets the definition of qualifying land, and if the State Department, State Wildlife Agency says, yes, your land, and who knows how long that will take them, because they told us if we didn't have an HCP, they were losing staff, being defunded, the process would take longer, so I have no idea how long it'll take to get the state's approval. And then if you have the state's approval and the local's approval, there's no guarantee you have the federal approval. And if the state and local approve it within 6 months, and the feds say, sorry, we've downsized, it'll be a couple of years, I've got a problem with this.
If I may,
Yes, Member Tucker.
I think I was on about a year before you, and there was a lot of heated discussion about this at the time. And if I remember, it was sent back to management team and legal team to iron out. And again, it is a concern. It's a major concern for anybody who's doing property and for other projects. It was brought up by public comment, if I remember correctly, because of. But in the end, what our legal advice was that we pretty much had no choice.
Okay,
but
well,
to go along with that.
Member Tucker, I hope we have thank you for that. And I hope we have a very good definition of qualifying land so that anybody who's coming in who has, to Member Schmidt's point, I met with a person a couple days ago. It's got wetlands. He's interested in using for mitigation, donating in return for development, et cetera. That if we have it spelled out. Qualifying land is X. And if you meet X, Y, and Z, you may do this. And Fish and Game and Fish and Wildlife, federal and state, to Member Pravetti's point, if the applicant meets those, they must say yes. And I don't want this blown up. We've got a good thing going. Mm-hmm. Yes, Member Schmidt.
Thank you. I think what I understand from council's comments is that all lands that go into the reserve have to be approved by the wildlife agencies. So if they don't approve it, it's not just a problem for these private applicants. It means our whole process will grind to a halt very quickly. This habitat plan will be done if they reject lands that we're saying to them, we want these to be put
If
into
they
the
take
reserve.
2 to 3 years to do it, it'll stop development.
It's going to kill us. The entire habitat plan. We'll lose our permit as well. We'll fall behind, and we won't be able to permit anything before. So I hopefully that might wake them up. If nothing else will.
Thank you. On the record.
So hopefully then we can find lands that are as good a quality as lands we're buying on our own when they be submitted in lieu, and then it won't be a problem. Hopefully. I do note, as to Member Pravetti's comments, that the Water District has had trouble getting lands that it thinks is suitable for mitigation credited by the wildlife agencies. But hopefully we're going to establish a good relationship on these things and have really high-quality land. And
We've been
make that
dating
happen.
for 8 years.
So if I had a
Please.
different comment, the question I had, two questions actually. One was about whether this dedication of lands in lieu of fees, could that be conservation easement or is it fee title?
It could be either.
Okay. I didn't see anything about access, where either the land, whether it's in fee title or easement, could be land that you need special access to get to there. Somebody's back 40, maybe it's a great back 40. But is that something that doesn't need to be in this resolution?
Certainly for any land that goes into the reserve system, access needs to be addressed. And there has to be some way to access the property to be able to manage it, whether it be appropriate for public trails or not, rangeland, which probably wouldn't have trails, private rangeland that comes in under conservation easement. But in any case, the issue of access would need to be resolved in the conservation easement itself for that particular property.
Will that be part of the templates that we're working on for land acquisition then? I see a nod.
Oh,
behind
certainly,
you.
yes. It's one of those issues that has to be addressed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other
I
comments?
also mention I found something that may give you a little bit of comfort. I knew it was in here, but I couldn't find it before.
All right.
There is a section in the implementing agreement that talks about reserve unit management plans, and they have to be approved by the wildlife agencies. Obviously, when we're taking in property into the reserve system, we have to have a management plan for it as well, and we have to say, we have to arrange for how this property is going to be managed that we're taking in.
Sure.
There's a 60-day review period for the wildlife agencies built into the implementing agreement. So there are some timelines that we can force by saying this is the property and this is our management plan.
Good to know. Thank you.
So, so we did attempt that in this plan. Whether or not everyone meets it is a whole other matter, but the intent is that they will provide us comments, and what it also says is if they do not provide comments within 60 days after receiving the revised draft reserve unit management plan, the wildlife agency will be deemed to have approved the draft plan. Now, that doesn't mean that they will have approved the property, but they will have approved the management plan. So they're not going to want to have a management plan for property without, see what I'm getting at? There are some timelines here that they do have to meet on components of this deal.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So they may try to take longer, but there are some components that they have timelines on.
Thank you. Member Pravetti.
Thank you, and I wanted to thank Council for walking us through what's in the implementation agreement. I would suggest the policy does identify sections 9.43, 9.5, but I'm not seeing any reference to 9.1. So I think to the extent the policy can have those cross-referencing linkages, I think that will just give comfort for all of us who will stay involved through implementation. And with that modification, I move that we approve the policy and the resolution.
So that was a motion to adopt the resolution.
With the
Second.
modification.
With the modification. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously.
And to clarify, you're okay with wherever I want to put these sections in?
Absolutely, I trust your judgment.
Okay, thank you.
And Angie, that was a motion by Member Pravetti, seconded by Tucker. You're welcome. That was item number 4. We now move on to item 5. I just know it comes after 4. I don't have it here, but here we go. The appointments of members to the Public Advisory Committee. And Ken, that's you, and I believe we have at least Georgina here. Yes? We did? Yes? Yes, right back there. I know I saw you earlier. Ken, do you want to make that introduction?
Just very briefly, at the last meeting, at the January meeting, the board appointed 6 members to the Public Advisory Committee. We had 3 slots that we did not have candidates for. We've done additional outreach in a variety of different ways, and we've identified, in fact, 4 applicants, 2 for, that would be for one of the positions is a ranching position. We have 2 applicants for that, Kyle Wolf and Michael Johnson, and the committee recommends Kyle Wolf. And then for the business development positions, Dick Oliver from Dividend Homes has applied, and Georgia Press from a company in the city of Gilroy, and we work with the Gilroy Chamber of Commerce to see if we could roust out some names, and this is the name that they recommended. So we recommend the appointment of Kyle Wolf, Richard Oliver, and Georgia Threfs.
Treff Scarfink. Yes. Thank you. Anyone from the public wishing to speak to this item 5? Seeing none, thank you for all those that have volunteered. Committee members, board members, motion?
Move to approve recommendation.
Thank you. Member
I'll
Tucker?
second.
Thank you, Member Pravetti. Any discussion? None. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
5, Member Schmidt, as chair.
Thank you. I just wanted to, maybe we did this for last time when we had more applicants for the positions that are around, but if we could send some type of thank you to in this case, Mr. Johnson, and encourage their participation. These relatively informal committees, even if you're not on the committee, you can have a say without question. So I hope
Public meetings.
I hope they do.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Thank you. With that, we move on to item number 6, the authorization of the interim executive officer to travel and participate in meetings in Washington, D.C. regarding Habitat Conservation Plan related federal funding. Mr. Interim Executive Officer, Ken.
As Chair Wasserman knows, I think I was trying to get out of this trip, and I couldn't find anybody to say it wasn't important for me to go. This is an annual trip by Habitat Conservation Organizations in California to go to Washington to meet with people on federal budget-related issues, grants, and other funding for Fish and Wildlife Service related to habitat plans. I have avoided this in the past. We didn't have an adopted plan. I didn't have budget. Those excuses failed this year because we have an adopted plan and there is money in the budget. I will let you know that right now, and this schedule changes by the hour, I fear, but right now we have meetings scheduled 17, plus 2 dinner meetings between Wednesday and Thursday.
26th and 27th?
26, 27, total of 17 different meetings, 10 representatives, staff from Senator Boxer's office, Senator Feinstein's office, Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of the Interior, Office of Management and Budget in the White House, and the staff from the Senate Interior Appropriation Committee. So we will, I'm sure, be running very fast back there. I put at your places a handout that I will take with me. It has a fold-out brochure, and when I asked Jill, in fact, to investigate the idea of putting together some type of brochure, she came across one that we had done, I think, 3 different times with ICF for the various community meetings. And so we were able to do a brochure with a little bit of editing and just a little bit of cutting and pasting of already established electronic files. And the printing didn't cost very much, so we actually have a brochure. And then second is there's a cover letter which actually gets down in the last paragraph to the fact that the commitments by the state and federal governments for grant funding in the Habitat Plan. And that's the essence of this whole trip back to Washington, is to key in on trying to get grant funding, first to survive in the budget, but also to try to get it back up closer to where it was years ago. So this will be a trip that actually is next week. I put the cost estimates are based on actual costs.
Thank you. Any questions? Anyone wishing to speak regarding item number 6 from the public? Seeing none, motion from the committee to authorize this expense. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously.
Chair Wasserman?
Yes, Sarah.
If I may, I found the section I was looking for on land in lieu.
On which one?
On land in lieu.
Okay.
So it's item number 4. They have 30 days or the land is deemed in the system.
What section is that?
Wow.
It is
Wow,
section 9.1 of the implementing agreement.
That's great.
9.1, okay.
Yep,
That's huge.
yeah.
I feel much better than I
It's
did.
deemed approved if they don't give us any comments or respond within 30 days. I knew it was in here.
Thank you.
That's fine.
I
Thank
felt
you.
good after my gluten-free cookie, and then I kind of went down in my sugar. Now I'm back up again. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, that
I
was,
normally wouldn't interrupt you since it was such a concern. Thank you.
That is big. No,
I,
that's reasonable. Yep, that's all. At least the time, quick response. And if they do come back with a no, this doesn't qualify, then, as Member Pravetti said, then we can work out the details, why not, or what needs to be done. You know, that, more wetlands, whatever it is, kind of a thing. Wonderful. I like that answer. Thank you. We are now on to item number 7, the status report on the recruitment of the executive officer. Ken, you're going to start us off?
I want to introduce Ed Tweez from CPS HR, our consultant for the executive officer search, and Ed will provide us with an update on where we are with this process. And then part of the recommendation is to set a special meeting on April 30th, and I think the caveat that didn't get in the staff report was that the date needs to fit the final candidates. And if we find we've got 3 really good candidates and they're all committed to being out of the state for that particular day, or one of them or 2 of them or whatever, we will work with the selection committee to find another date to keep this process moving along.
I'm hoping that anybody entertaining this job will be flexible.
I would hope so too. I can
Yes.
imagine wedding anniversary trips and things like that that could get in the way.
I think a new job would help with the wedding anniversary. All right, Mr. Dweez.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Ed Tweez. My colleague Pam Derby and I are assisting you with the executive search for your executive officer position. We've met with your selection committee and interviewed many of you and others on the non-attending members of the various boards to help develop the profile. We published a brochure. It was open for applications for a little more than 3 weeks. We advertised widely in 14 different journals and professional associations, and distributed the brochure to professional organizations and those that we were aware of interest, including 7 individuals that had been suggested by your members, by your board members, that we contact. And some of those 7 did actually indeed apply. We received 27 resumes, which Pam wants me to suggest to you is average for such highly specialized recruitments. So the position you were recruiting for is brand new to this agency, and a fairly specialized set of assignments. Of those 27, based on an application review, we've identified 11 that we think meet your minimum qualifications, and we'll be conducting screening interviews with those folks over the next few days. And then we will present to your selection committee on April the 1st what we call a client report, which is all of the applications that we've received, the results of our screening interviews with the 11 or so folks, and the selection committee will then meet on April the 1st, and will determine which, if any, candidates to invite to in-person interviews. Those interviews were announced in the brochure as on April the 18th. Did I say April 1st earlier? I made a mistake. So the in-person interviews are on April the 18th. The goal is to bring back to the appointing authority, which we understand to be the implementation board, top candidates for you to review. The selection committee was hopeful that they could identify 1 top candidate and bring a recommended candidate to for your consideration. We had suggested to the selection committee that it is our practice to identify the top 2 or 3 for a couple of reasons. One is it's always best to have choices. In the early stages of the process, we're comparing candidates against the ideal profile. In the latter part of the process, you're comparing candidates who've met those kind of minimums against each other. And we think if you had choices, that would be helpful. And we want to remind you that under our contract, we will conduct background checks on the top candidate or candidates. And so there may be material and information generated during the reference and background checks that you might also find of interest. We have committed to the agency to conduct a separate assignment, which is to do the compensation salary survey Work is underway, and that will be presented to your selection committee on April the 1st. Recall that in the brochure, the agency determined that you wanted to have flexibility with respect to compensation. You don't have a personnel system. A lot of things are open, and you wanted to make sure that you were tailoring your proposal to your selected executive officer, to the executive officer's needs as well as yours. And we're going to give the selection committee the results of the salary survey on April the 1st. And we're also available to assist you, and we've been asked to draft deal points for a potential employment agreement by which the next executive officer will be hired, and that will be presented to the selection committee as well. And that concludes my report, but I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Anyone from the public? Anyone from the public wishing to speak on this item? No, thank you. Thank you, Ed. Please thank Pam as well. The selection committee members, we have it on our calendar for the 3 hours on April 1st and, 3 hours on April 18th and 2 hours on April 1st as we go forward. I'm very pleased, I think, to hear, what did you say, 28? How many people altogether that applied? You're down to 11, but
27 applicants.
27.
We're going to be following up with 11.
27 applicants apply, and to find 11 that meet at least minimum criteria that are worth a second look, I think is tremendous and very encouraging. Committee members, any questions? Yes.
Yes.
Member Prevetti.
Thank you. First, I wish to thank CPS and their work on the recruitment, and definitely want to express appreciation for the selection committee and all of the hard work they're going to be doing as they go through the interviews. I just want to get clarity regarding the April 30th meeting. So it sounds like there's really two agenda items. One is the final interviews for multiple candidates. I respect that the selection committee is hoping to bring forth just one candidate, but I agree with Mr. Tweese that having a choice and maybe the top 2 or 3 would be beneficial. We never know if negotiations might break down or there might be some other contingency, so I think for the board to see at least the top 2 or 3 would be useful. And the second agenda item would be the deal points with respect to a future employment agreement, just so we have clarity about what we're hoping to accomplish on the 30th.
Thank you. And speaking on behalf of the selection committee, which Member Tucker and Member Schmidt and myself are on, I think our goal, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is to perhaps come back to the board with maybe a top 3 choice, a first, second, a third. That's kind of what I'm envisioning. Okay. I don't know about the other 2, but I think doing that, and Member Prevetti, that would address what you just asked. That's what I'm used to from having our city managers bring back to councils, recommendations and saying here were our top 3 after the 27 got weeded down to 11, then we're heard through second and third interviews. We're bringing forth 3, and this would be in our order. And I hope members Tucker and Schmidt that we can do that. And if we end up with a couple at the top or whatever, but does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Does that work
Thank
for you?
you.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other discussions, questions,
Actually,
comments? Yes.
I
Member
already
Tucker.
know April 30th I'm on a scholarship committee in the morning. I will try to see if my alternate can come. But I'll be disappointed because I actually wanted to be there.
For implementation board?
Yes, for
Okay,
implementation.
but you are available for the 1st and the 18th when we get it down to the, okay, good.
I'll have
Thank
to
you.
double check with my alternate if the 30th is good.
Yeah.
What is the criteria again? 1 per agency on the implementation board?
That's-
You have 11 members.
You have to have 7. You don't need to have every
But do you need more
every
information?
agency
That's
represented.
what I
No,
wanted.
not on the implementation.
Okay,
board.
governing board
Seven.
has to be.
Governing board is 1 from each, but implementation board.
But if you could, please ask for
I would-
alternate, because the implementation board would like to continue its
Yes.
record of perfect success and forums.
Oh, please.
I'm just saying. Okay. All right.
I might note, Chair Wasserman, that the chair has the authority to set a special meeting. And we brought this to you today in part to highlight this date and to trigger the exact type of things that I have a problem or concern that we need to try to be aware of. But the chair actually has that authority without any authorization. But we wanted to highlight it, and that's why it's on the agenda this way.
All right. Adopt a motion setting special board meeting of the 30th. So that's what you're looking for, Dara, is a motion. to set
With
that
the understanding too, that you have, that the chair has the authority to change that if it doesn't work. For
But
some
as long
reason.
as everyone's here, we might as well discuss it. That's a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Other members, as far as that date on your calendar, other issues?
So we need at least 7.
Yes. I have, everyone else has that on their calendar. Member Tucker, is that okay with you? Do you want us to?
No,
wait for
I'll go
another-
ahead, and agree with this.
Okay. So the other 7 that are saying nodding yes right now, I do need you all to be there on the 30th, and we'll do that, or I may not hear the end of it for a while. We're very good friends. I'm just kidding. We're just having fun. Okay, so I need a motion, please, to set April 30.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. All right. Thank you. Ed, thank you very much, and please thank Pam. Thank you very much for your outreach. Obviously was successful in getting so many people to respond back. Again, I think 11 people that perhaps meet what we're looking for is great, and for adhering to our schedule, which I know was expedited. So I appreciate that. Item 8 is Ken, the staff's report on the recruitment of the Habitat Agency Legal Services and Implementation Board authorization of chair. Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is a somewhat unusual item. In January, the board authorized that an outreach, an RFP for legal services for the agency in the city of San Jose, noted that they would not be continuing to be a candidate for legal services after June 30th. So an RFP was prepared, and it's attached to the staff report. The deadline closed yesterday. We have 14 individuals and firms that replied to it, so it is a notable stack of paper. The JPA agreement does not call out legal counsel as a specific position for board appointment, as it does for executive officer or controller treasurer or clerk. And thus, the recommendation for provision of legal services really falls under the general recommendations allocated to the executive officer. In this case, I have asked Debbie Cobble from the county to assist me in reviewing this stack of proposals. And the staff report notes that Sandy Sloan, who's recently retired from the Jorgensen firm in Menlo Park, would help us. Sandy is not available, but Andy Faber from the Berliner Cohn firm has agreed to assist us in this process. So it would be Debbie, Andy, myself. The other part of this is that I would like to have a member of either of the implementation or governing boards. Since legal counsel serves you as well as serving staff, I think it's appropriate for me to have somebody in this process that can provide me advice, etc. The recommendation is going to be mine, but certainly I will listen carefully to the views of others in this process.
Thank you. And let me interrupt there if I can. It's always fun to recommend somebody who's not in attendance. And as I sit in the...
he's famous for it.
And as I sit in the Morgan Hill chambers, thinking about the mayor who's at spring training in Arizona, I do... It would be a low blow to do that, but for full disclosure, I contacted Mayor Tate when I saw this item on the agenda. I asked if he would consider, this is under item recommended action number 2, we're authorizing chair to appoint a member. It says of the implementation board, but
It's either.
the attorney serves, the executive director serves, the implementation, the governing, et cetera. I don't think we're restrained by that, unless there's a majority objection to being restrained by that. But I called Mayor Tate, I think after the Giants had beaten the A's, and asked if he would be willing to take on this role and join Ken and Debbie and Andy in the analysis evaluation of the applications that have been submitted. And so I will make that motion, throw it out to you, look for a second, or look for another recommendation. Second, Member Kennedy, thank you. Any other discussion? Any member from the public wishing to, what are we on, 8? speak on item number 8? No? Yes, Vera.
Chair Wasserman, you could appoint as many people as you wanted to this, and you can appoint whoever you desire. It is not an enumerated responsibility of the executive officer to select a committee for this.
Okay.
And it, the responsibilities or whatever is delegated. So if you desire to have 2 or 3 members of the board be on a selection committee, you may do so, or anyone else that you desire.
Thank you. We've got Ken, Debbie, Andy, and now Mayor Tate. I just chuckled, but he does know about it, and he did agree about it. Would anybody else wish to be appointed to this? Otherwise, we have 4 people. No, we're good. All right, so we have a motion, and I had a second. Where did I have a motion?
The second, I had the second. You made the
Member
motion.
Kennedy? I made the motion.
I second.
Wasserman, Kennedy. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. That passes unanimously. That's 8. And our next meeting, Angie, perhaps, can you give me that date? What do I have? I don't.
Actually, I have a question, though.
Yes, Member Tucker.
Since we didn't have a quorum of the governing board, and also on the agenda was to adopt the resolution for fee recovery, how are you going to get fee recovery if we don't have another meeting of the...
We don't have any applicants either, so.
Oh, okay.
So staff is comfortable with that item going to the next governing board meeting in June, and the next implementation board meeting is May the 15th.
Okay, so regular meetings, you said May 15th
May the 15th.
for both?
No, it's
Implementation only?
board for
Okay.
May 15th, and then the governing board is June the 20th, I'm thinking? Third Thursday in June.
Does it seem to look like the 19th? We all whip out our iPads,
No, I didn't.
go to the calendar. What did we say, June? Third Thursday is the 19th.
Okay.
And is that governing and implementation? Or just governing? All right. Okay, any other comments? Member Kennedy?
Well, I just wanted to apologize if I did, in fact, delay the start of the meeting. Director Lizotte did ask me, and I agreed to fill in for her. Earlier today, we had a tour of Anderson Dam and Upper Yagas Creek with Congressman Sam Farr earlier this afternoon to seek his support for a federal nexus of those 2 projects, which he was happy to do. So I went home and was resting on my laurels. And I think I rested too much on my laurels, so I apologize.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for having that date when we'll have our 7. Member Tucker not available on that date to do that final decision as far as our attorney goes. So we're set. Meeting adjourned.